Amy, how you doing?
I'm very good, Gary. How are you?
I'm good. Cold.
I know, I think we're just about thawed out here.
Yes.
Got my big fluffy jumper on, just
nice
especially
and
for
warm.
the occasion.
Nice and warm. We're going to chat about your career. I was doing my research. I always do a bit of research on people.
Oh no, I always worry what happens. What happens when you Google me? I don't know.
Nothing bad, right? But I was looking at all the different things you've done from TV and radio, and there's a lot of different things, a lot of really good things. But from your point of view, do you ever reflect on them? Like even like sitting where you're sitting now, do you ever reflect and go, I'm doing all right in life?
Probably not as much as I should,
Yeah.
if I'm being honest with you. I think it's such a fast-paced industry that you're always going from one thing to the next and looking ahead. And before you know it, I mean, I graduated in 2013, and I think I probably had a moment of realisation last year when I thought, oh my God, I finished uni 10 years ago. And I think I took a moment then to reflect and think that I'd probably achieved more than I thought I would have, and
Really?
give myself a bit of recognition for that. Because I honestly, if you'd have said to me at uni that you would have even had a job in TV and radio, I would probably have not believed you and then bitten your hand off for that guarantee. So to then look back and see how lucky I've been to have done a lot of the things that I have, it is quite humbling in a way. And I did take probably a moment to think, gosh, this isn't, if it all ended tomorrow,
Yeah.
you've done not bad.
Did you always want to do like the presenting TV stuff, radio stuff? Was it always the career angle for you, or what were you thinking when you were at high school?
I'm one of these annoying people, and I have 4 little brothers and they all hate me for it because
Right.
I was the first one, obviously, that went to high school and finished and went to uni and everything. And they're like, you're so annoying because you knew what you wanted to do when you were like 6 years old. And it's kind of true and maybe a wee bit sad, but I always knew I wanted to work in some kind of TV or broadcasting, and it was back, this is now really me showing my age, because it was back when you would have a family video camera.
Yes.
And I would make news programmes with my little brother who'd be
Amazing.
roped in to do it with me. And we called it Iron's Look Around because I grew up in Dumfries, so it was called, the local news programme was called Look Around
Right.
on ITV Border. So we basically filmed it in the utility room. I always remember, because I'd be like, don't put the washing machine on, Dad. We're about to film an episode of Iron's Look Around. And it was just talking absolute nonsense, interviewing family members, and any opportunity I had to make something with this video camera, I would go on holidays. And I remember it was like a place in the sun. Here we are on holiday in our villa, and the rest of my family are probably like, put the camera down and shut up, you're so annoying. But so I think I always, if you'd asked me, I might not have said this is what I want to do,
Yeah.
but it was always in me probably to be this, a bit of a performer. I was really into drama as well when I was younger, and I found this probably a sense of escapism in a way, and I just liked this role and being able to present or act in some way. So yeah, it was probably always in there. I just didn't realise it when I was really young.
Tell me those videos still exist somewhere.
They do. They painfully do. In fact, remember there was a phase where people would get like old family videos put onto DVD?
Yes.
My papa, I remember doing that. He was like, I'm getting these all made into DVD. Where they are now, I have no idea, Gary, but they will exist somewhere.
Love that. Love that. How did you find the uni experience? I'm at uni myself, and I've spoke to so many guests, and it's kind of half and half on loved the experience, got so much out of it, to didn't enjoy it at all. It's like there's no middle ground with it. But how did you find it?
Personally, I mean, I loved it. I think everything that comes with uni, the social side of it. I was from Dumfries, so when I first moved to Glasgow, it was this eye-opening experience, moving to the big smoke in the big city, and I just loved it. I was like, what, you have shops that are open 24 hours a day and you can get takeaways whenever you want? So I loved that side of it. And in terms of the actual academic side of it as well, I must say I went to Cali, and one of the reasons I actually picked that uni, because I had unconditionals for a few and I went and had a look around, and the reason I picked that was because it was so practical, it was so hands-on, and it was really it really gave you the skills that you would need to be able to get a job in the industry. And they had a radio studio, they had a TV studio. So when you were looking at courses, I thought this is properly going to prepare you for getting a job in broadcasting. And before I'd gone to uni, I did a bit of work experience at my local radio station, and that was one of the things that the guys told me early on. It was like, any kind of experience you can get, that is what is going to make the difference. You can read books and you can write essays, but if you want to get into broadcast, the best way of learning is actually doing it.
Yeah.
So when I went to uni, you were in a way thrown in at the deep end in some regards. I remember we'd have to do these news days, and you'd have lecturers, saying, right, you're starting with nothing, and by the end of the day, you need to have a 20-minute news programme. Go away and do it. And we always managed it. And I mean, it wasn't always brilliant, and I would probably hate to watch some of it back now, but it really did prepare you, and you got feedback as well. And whether it was on your voice, your presenting, your scripting, whatever it was. So you were learning while you were still at uni, as well as obviously doing all the kind of typical modules that you had to do, your legal modules and shorthand and economics and everything.
Yeah.
But the practical skills that I got from Cali were really invaluable.
And is it a competitive environment? Because obviously you've got a lot of people on these courses and they all want to do the same thing, and obviously the experience is massive, but there's only so many places you can go and get the experience. But was there a competitive edge to it as well, to try and find some different things that no one else had kind of jumped on and there was still space to go and do?
I think there probably was. We were quite a small group, I remember. So there was only about 20 of us in the class, and other people's experience might be different, but there actually were very few of us who wanted to get into broadcast.
Right.
There were maybe only 4 or 5, and even within that, I mean, I think I'm trying to think about it right now. There were maybe 2 of us that ended up going into broadcast.
Right.
A lot of people went into newspapers, digital. There's some producers. So there wasn't really anyone that was directly that similar.
Yeah.
So I remember me and a guy, Colin, who was a really good friend of mine, and the 2 of us probably would go for similar types of work experience. But you'd find that there was always space. There was always time for the people who would go out and make that effort, because you would have to go and make the effort to get the work experience in your own time. And it was who was actually willing to do that. So if you would, I remember working part-time. I don't know how many jobs going through uni, from being a balloon decorator to working at a sunbed shop. I would do that and uni, and then on the side I'd be going into Radio Clyde or the BBC and just trying to get in wherever you could, whether it's for a day or for a week, whatever it was. And I think just knowing that you have to do that if you want to have a job by the end of it is definitely one of the biggest things that I probably look back at and think I'm very, very glad that I did do that.
Is it daunting going into these places? Obviously, if you're learning your trade at uni and you're doing bits where you can, but you're going into like Clyde as an institution, and you're coming in there to learn.
Oh my goodness, I remember the first time going into Clyde on work experience, and it was this massive office, and it's these voices that you hear on the radio and you're so used to it, and then you see these people in real life, and it was just so fast paced, because you'd be on the news desk, they'd have bulletins every hour, and there was just almost no time for small talk. It was like, right, if you got this, can you put that call in? Can you do this? Can you do that? Right, who's going to get me that interview? And it was so ruthless in a way, but that was because I was like a deer in headlights when I first walked in. But I actually remember leaving my first day of work experience and going for dinner with my mum and gran and saying, I don't know if I can do this. Like, I don't know if I have the skills required for that kind of environment. But it was just that I was out my comfort zone, because by the end of the week, it was great. I loved it. And I remember going out actually, and it was with Gordon Duncan, who I know has been on the podcast. And I know Gordon pretty well. And I went out with him, and he was still working in news, and he was interviewing Nicola Sturgeon, who was the health minister at the time. And I remember that was the first time feeling properly shocked, because we were about to walk into this interview, and I said, Gordon, what are you going to ask? Where's your questions? He's like, I don't know, figure it out. I'm like, what? You don't have a list of questions written down, and we're about to interview Nicola Sturgeon? He was like, oh no, I've got an idea of what I'm going to say, and then we'll see what she says.
Yeah.
And I just could not get my head around this idea of going in to interview someone without a full list of questions, because that's what I'd been doing through uni. But yeah, you realise the more that you've been in it, the experience just, you build up confidence, and that's certainly what I was seeing in Gordon. He had the confidence that I didn't have at that point.
But then when you look back on it now, do you feel that's important for anybody looking to get into the industry, to get that experience when you're at uni and get about places and get to know these kind of areas and get out that comfort zone?
Definitely.
I suppose.
Yeah, because it's also the only way that you'll know if it's what you want to do, because there are a lot of people, I know a lot of people, friends of mine, that maybe studied journalism or ventured into the industry and then completely changed careers. Just one, because maybe it was financial, or the opportunities weren't there, or for some of them they just didn't like it, because it's you don't know if it's going to be for you until you venture into that. And TV and radio, they are very different to what you see, the kind of finished product. There's a lot that goes on behind the scenes. There's a lot of other work that's involved, and it isn't for everyone. And there's certainly been times where I've thought, gosh, I don't know if I can do this anymore. So I would say, as well as it being good to try and get a step in the door and a foot on the ladder in a career sense, it's also good because if you go in, you might go, do you know what, I don't know if I like this, and I had to come and try it first. So I think from both sides, it can be really beneficial to go and do some work experience.
Do you think, see from your point of view, you've went that path and you've now established yourself, and you probably see other people trying to go on that path now. Is there a certain thing or something that kind of jolts people out of that? I don't know if I can do this. Is it just the pace of doing it, or is it something else? Because I asked Gordon and I asked Emma Dodds as well, and both of them said, even though they were established now, they've never felt comfortable in their job or doing what they do. And that baffles me, that length of time.
I have massive impostor syndrome.
Yeah.
Oh, terrible.
Have you always had it?
Yeah. I'm quite nervous and anxious and a total perfectionist. So when you combine all of those things together, I used to think the longer I've been in this, the better I'll feel. Yeah. But it actually, in a way, it's gone the opposite way, because you almost feel like you've been in it for so long, so people expect more, or you've got more to lose because you've built up a reputation, and you're maybe working on more high-profile programmes, or more people are seeing you or hearing you. So in a way, it's a little bit more daunting, I would say, now. And it's just, you always use it, like any performer in a way, and I'm sure Gordon and Emma would have said the same. You'll feel that way beforehand. And I remember the first time I did Hogmanay, and I was going to be live at the castle, and I was maybe only broadcasting for a few minutes in total. And I did not sleep the night before. I couldn't eat for about 2 days. I was so nervous. Jeez. And then you get there, and I drove there, and probably the whole drive I would still be like hands like shaking, like, oh my God, turn back. Like, is there any way the programme might be cancelled? Like, but then I get there, and it's almost like the game face goes on, and you just find a way of channeling the nerves. And that's what I would say to anybody that's getting into this. It's good to be nervous. It's trying not to let the nerves get the best of you, and trying to use them in a good way. So I kind of accepted that I'll always be nervous. I'll always get a bit anxious about particularly a new job. I mean, it's different. I don't get nervous doing like the Nine or Report in Scotland or my show on Heart. I don't get nervous doing that anymore because it is the day job. But the first time I did all of those things, and the first time I do anything else, I'll still get really, really nervous. And it's, I don't know. I probably think that is quite common. As I say, if you'll know, having spoken to, as you say, people like Gordon and Emma, but yeah, I've been like that forever. And it's just trying to harness it that I've probably got a little bit better at as I've got older.
And if you get like, obviously, if something new comes in, do you look at it right away with nerves before anything's happened with it? Are you not worrying but try to kind of put yourself into that situation? Did the nerves kick in even at that point?
Worrying about what could possibly go wrong, like how... Just I'll maybe get an initial request. So I remember I got asked to do, it was like the before and after show party for the Sports Personality of the Year when it was in Aberdeen in 2019. And I got asked to do it and I said, yep. But I then was like, what have I signed up for? And it's almost, I then just needed some answers. And I was then desperate to know, right, okay, how long is the programme? Do I have another co-host? Will there be VTs in there? Is it all completely live? Is there an auto cue? And it's all these things that, it's the fear of the unknown, essentially what it is. Which again is very common in this industry because a lot of jobs will be different. So it's normal to get a bit nervous because you're trying to prepare. But yeah, oh gosh, sometimes I will think, God, how bad could this be? Like, is this a good idea? If you muck up, how many people are going to see you? Are we talking hundreds of thousands? So I will kind of weigh it up in whether or not I am prepared or ready to do a job. And it was the same when I did Sports Scene when Jonathan Sutherland was off. He went off for a few months on paternity, and I go from being so sure I want to do it. I'm like, yep, great, that sounds great. And then the week before, I'm like, what have I done? Why am I doing this? Surely there must be somebody better that can do this. And it's just a bit of self-doubt keeping in. But as I say, the minute that light goes on above the camera and it's like on air time, it's like showtime, and you just, something just clicks. I don't know what that is, but something I'm hoping clicks.
Are you self-critical after you've done something?
Oh yeah.
Do you look back on it and...
I used to watch everything.
Really?
Oh, I used to watch everything, listen to everything, and just be so self-critical about the way I've said something, the way I'm looking at something, the way I'm dressed, like the programme as a whole. I would tear it apart. And then I stopped doing that. Because I think I realised things can go wrong because most of what I do will be live and you can't change it afterwards. Like, you cannot change it. I remember doing one of my first ever lives was at STV, and I was in, because I worked in news, and it was a body had been found at Mugdock Country Park, and I was live on the 6 o'clock news. And basically I was standing and like a car just started reversing towards me. So I had kind of the cameraman like kind of shouting and the police trying to move me while I was live. And I just completely lost my train of thought, because back then I used to script everything to like within an inch of its life. So it was more a memory game. And because I'd then been thrown off, I couldn't remember what I was going to say. Now, it probably wasn't as bad as it felt, but I remember just going home after that and watching it over, and it's my dad who is always brilliant for advice, and he was like, Amy, like, it's done. Like, you can't change it now, and it will be forgotten about. Even if people are talking about it today, they're not going to be talking about it tomorrow. Like, just stop being so hard on yourself. So I think probably from that point, I realised, why am I tormenting myself with this? It's done. I know what happened. I was there. Well, that's true. You don't need to watch it back. So I've stopped doing that. Because I don't really think it's very, very useful.
I couldn't deal with that. I still watch my stuff back.
I hate what my mum's favourite thing to do is, especially when I first kind of started doing more for the BBC, she would, I mean, you would think would know that you could get things on catch up, but no, she would still record it on Series Link on Sky. And I'd go to the house and the whole family would be there. You're talking brothers and partners and my grandchild. Shall we watch Amy on Scott Squad? Or shall we watch that episode like of Sports Scene or whatever it was? I'm like, no, why would you do that when I'm here? Like, I don't want to watch it. So I hate watching myself with other people as well. I would rather avoid that at all costs, Gary.
I think that's a Scottish thing.
Yeah, it is,
genuinely
isn't it?
Is. Like, anybody I know that does stuff like that, they're like, no, I don't want to see myself. Don't want to know about it. Did you like it? Brilliant. We'll leave it at that.
That is all I need to know. Great. Let's move on with our lives.
So when you left uni, you'd obviously said at the start there that you didn't expect to get the jobs you've got. Why? Why not?
Oh, gosh. I I mean, I knew it was competitive. And I mean, through uni, you are told it is competitive. There are not a lot of jobs. And I remember as I started coming towards the end of uni, you're starting to look for jobs.
Yeah.
And there were no jobs. Like jobs were very, very rarely being advertised, especially in broadcast. And I was starting to think maybe it's not going to happen. I don't know how people actually get into the industry and get that break. And my initial plan, actually, when I finished uni, was to go to America for 3 months. And I'd booked my flights and everything. And just typical, a job then comes up about, I think it was about a month before I was due to fly. And I thought, I need to apply. And this is where the contacts proved vital, because it actually was at West Sound Radio, which is where I'd been doing my work experience.
Right, okay.
So I'd been going into West Sound in Dumfries since I was like 14, and a job happened to come up for West Sound, and they had an office in Ayr and Dumfries at this time. So I went for the job and never got it. And I remember being absolutely, in fact, it was Valentine's Day, the interview. I always remember that. And I never got the job. And I remember being just so like gutted, because it was probably my first proper taste of rejection, really. And as somebody who was like a perfectionist, as I say, all through school, if I wasn't getting good grades, I was like so hard on myself.
Did you think you were going to get it? See, when you'd done like your interview?
No, I didn't come out going, I've smashed that interview or whatever. So I never expected to get it, but the disappointment of not getting it still kind of hurt, because I thought, oh my goodness, what am I going to do now? But then they phoned back about 3 weeks later and said, we'd like to offer you a job. So it was like the ups and downs, the highs and lows. And I had to make a decision. And I remember phoning my mum and dad. I was like, I've booked my flights and everything. And this shows you the two sides of parenting that both influenced me in different ways. My mum was like, Amy, go on the journey, enjoy your travels. You're only young once, you'll get another job. My dad's like, take that job or I'm going to kill you. So I was like, whose advice do I take? But I ended up, I actually managed to do a bit of both.
Right.
I took the job, negotiated a slightly later start date, and went away for a month.
Well, that's still good,
isn't it? Yeah. So I still got a little break, little holiday, and then I came back and I started. And I remember, I mean, when I think about it now, I don't know if I'd be able to do it, but you just have to do anything when you first get that job, I suppose, and get your foot in the door. I started at 5 a.m. in Ayr, and I lived at home with my mum, which was near Livingston.
Jeez.
So I used to get up at 3 and drive an hour and a half from Livingston to Ayr, and I was like a news reporter, and in my wee Fiat and all weathers. And honestly, I remember I had friends who were travelling at the time. Girls I went to uni with were in Thailand, and I honestly remember it being like December, like temperatures like we've got at the moment, and I'm in my car like starting at 5 a.m. and they're sending me all the pictures from Thailand of them on the beach, and I go, why did I not go with them?
Exactly.
Why did I choose this? But I mean, listen, I certainly wouldn't change it now. And that is one thing, certainly, not just in this this industry, but probably a number of different jobs. You do need to sacrifice.
Yeah.
Everybody will have to sacrifice in some way. You can't have it all.
Yeah.
It's very, very difficult to spin every plate.
And I think that goes back to what we were saying before we started. I think a lot of kids look at that industry, but they don't see the hard yards that need to go in first of all. And that probably might be something that puts people off doing it, because I think it's that kind of, I want to make loads of money right away. Yeah. And I don't want to do X, Y, and Z. But I think in such a competitive industry, you've got to do stuff like that to stand out a bit.
And it is, I think, I mean, I've got 4 younger brothers, the youngest of which has just finished school. So, I mean, I see that firsthand, and probably the pressure that they're under as well, because social media it builds this expectation and this idea that you can get this instant gratification, that you can, click your fingers and you can get a job, and that having a sports car and loads of money and going on all these holidays is actually achievable and that every person should have that. And the same thing, I want this job, and it's not as straightforward as that. And I think that's what social media will not show. And I think it's one of the reasons why I'll quite happily speak to, whether it's students or kids at school or whoever, if they're looking for any advice, because the amount of times that people say, oh, I've seen on your Instagram, or I've like seen your career, and oh God, how, like, that's amazing. And I almost want them to know, first of all, it's not as easy as that, but also it is achievable.
Yeah.
But it started when I was 15.
Yeah.
Like, it really did. And if I can do it, so can you. But it doesn't go from, being 16, 17, finishing school and going, right, okay, I want to be a TV presenter now. Like, I've had a few people say, how do I be a TV presenter? And I said, well, probably not by thinking you're going to be a TV presenter right now is the first thing I would say. Like, you need to take it back 10 steps. And it is, okay, where's your local radio station? Where can you get some work experience? And to be fair, that's the one thing that has changed, certainly since I've been in the industry. I mean, the local radio station that I started in is no longer there.
Right.
A lot of these local newspapers, radio stations, have all closed down. So for kids and young people trying to get into the industry, it is hard, because how can they get a foot in the door if they don't have these local avenues? But then the big national broadcasters look for the experience, and if you don't have the experience, you can't get in the door. So it's a bit of a vicious cycle in that regard. So I actually think it has got harder in some ways. I think social media has made it's given people, they can put themselves in a shop window in a different way. They can say, here's my YouTube channel, or here's my podcast, and they can show it to prospective employers. But in terms of the actual jobs that are there, there's certainly been a reduction even in the time that I've been in the industry.
Suppose that's then where it comes back to that feeling comfortable, because even at your level, there probably is still that doubt of, there's not a lot of jobs about now, and obviously, where do I go from here?
And it can just all end. And I think that's one thing that I don't like to plan too far ahead. I don't like to think too far ahead. And I just, as I say, if it all finished tomorrow, I'd be very happy with what I've done, and I would go and get a real job, because the job I do, I'm very lucky, and it doesn't feel like work. So, I mean, if it all ended tomorrow, I would go and do, get a job, and I've done that before. So I'm just enjoying it, and it sounds cliche, but I am trying to just enjoy it, take each experience that comes, go into it with open arms and very open-mindedly. And I think just try not, I think if you set expectations and put pressure on yourself, ultimately you might end up disappointed. And I also think that you're then always chasing something, whereas I want to actually just enjoy what I'm doing at the moment. And it sounds so cliched, and it's coming out of my mouth, and I'm like, oh my God, stop. But you want to probably be in the present a wee bit more, and just stop thinking, okay, what's the next programme I'm working on? What's the next thing I want to do? And just try and be grateful for what you've got. But it also is hard, especially because I am freelance now, and you can't sit back entirely and go, oh, just wait for the opportunity to come to me, because there's that balance of proactively finding work, but not letting it become your sole focus in a way.
And that's the thing as well, because people probably don't see that side of it. If you're freelance, there is no stream of work that's just waiting to kind of chap your door and be like, Amy, why don't you do these 6 jobs? You're living in the moment, and you're doing the jobs you're doing, but part of you is like, well, what else is going to come? Or is anything else going to come? And that would be quite hard to live with as well, from that point of view.
I describe this industry as, it's a bit like a game of snakes and ladders. So rather than it being a career ladder, it is more like you can take one opportunity that can be a bit of a sideways step, and before you know it, it leads to something amazing. Or you can think that you're going up, and before you know it, you're out of contract, or a show's been cancelled. I mean, I remember being at Capital on the breakfast show and finding out that the show was cancelled, and we were like, but we've got these amazing figures and the show's doing really well, and it's like the rug is pulled from under you, and you're just like, wow, what do we do now? So it's, I think, it can be hard, and you just need to be prepared to deal with a bit of rejection and uncertainty, and not let it destroy you. Be able to take a bit of a knockdown and carry on in a way.
Does the rejection side of it become easier, or do you just find ways to kind of deal with it and move?
I think it becomes a wee bit easier.
Yeah.
It does, because you also know you're not on your own in that. You meet enough people in the same area of work that are like, oh gosh, did you? I didn't get that, or they didn't get this. So I've started taking things probably less personally, and you know that, do you know what? It's a business decision, or I've gone for someone else, or whatever it is, rather than going, what is wrong? What have I done? So I would say, I don't get as down with rejection probably as I once would have, because I think if you did, you just wouldn't survive very long in this. Like you would have to do something else, because it would really ruin you mentally.
What's been your biggest challenge, like from leaving uni to where you are now, like from a career point of view? What's been the hardest point for you?
Oh, the hardest point, career-wise, probably the first time I remember feeling at a bit of a crossroads was I was at STV, and at that point I'd been there for I think about 3 or 4 years, and I felt like I'd done most things. I'd been presenting, I'd got into sport, I was out reporting, I'd been abroad on stories, I'd kind of done everything. And Capital approached me and asked if I would go and do a demo for the breakfast show. And I remember going in not really thinking much of it, because I was like, oh, I'll just go and see how the demo goes, and not think too far ahead, as I say. And then they offered me a 3-month contract.
Right.
And it was to cover maternity. And I remember thinking, do I give up a full-time job somewhere that I've got all my friends, I've been here, I'm settled, I'm doing well, for a 3-month maternity contract? And there was something in me that just thought, oh, I'm a bit of a risk taker in a way. And I thought, what will I regret more? Not doing that?
Yep.
Or if I do it and it doesn't work out? So I decided to quit my job for a 3-month contract. And I remember putting my notice in, and that was when I thought, there's no going back now. And I was even told that I'd made mistakes. I had people saying, you're going to regret this.
Did that make you feel more determined?
Eventually, yes. I remember at the time thinking, what do you mean? What do you mean I'm making a mistake? Can I take my notice back and just we'll just shred it and forget this conversation ever happened? No, but there was a bit of, because it was coming from quite senior people in TV, that make you go, well, they're like 20 years ahead of me. They know how this works. So if they're telling me it's going to end in disaster, where are they getting that from? Am I just naive? So I remember being terrified at that point, but now it was the best decision I ever made, because that then it's like a snowball that then leads, that I had a brilliant 3 years at Capital, and everything that then led to, and definitely made me a better broadcaster. And that led to all my other BBC work that I then got into. So it turned out for the best, but at the time you don't know. So taking a bit of a risk, it can be scary, but ultimately sometimes you just need to take the plunge and go for it, and it'll work out in some way. Might not work out straight away, but at some point you'll probably be glad that you made that decision.
Did you see, for you, see when you done that and you then moved to Capital, was there a point for you where you then felt yourself, I've done the right thing? Was there a kind of moment or a time?
I think so, yeah. I think probably a couple of months in at Capital, and feeling like we were just, the show was really good. We'd been nominated for an award, an Arian Award, and you can just tell we were getting, you'd be out and about and people would be talking to you about the show, and the stuff we'd be doing on social media and things, like it just felt like the show was in a really good place.
Yeah.
And I was enjoying the job in a way that I'd probably stopped enjoying STV because regardless of what job you're in, when you've been in it for a long time, it does, you know, everybody looks for a new challenge at some point. So I just remember, a few months in, and I'm, you know, even though your alarm's going off at 4:30 in the morning, you're like, I'm coming in here and I'm having a laugh and we're playing music and we're doing stupid things on the radio. Like, how lucky am I to be able to call this a job? So that was probably the point I thought I would not be having this much fun in a job if I hadn't thrown in my notice.
Yeah. Bold strategy, but I like it. I like it. It just baffles me, but that you're in that job, right, and you've got those figures, the show's smashing it, and it just gets pulled. Like, that side of it, I don't think I would ever get comfortable with. Even if you're doing something really well, is there a part of you that's thinking, we don't know what's coming around the corner here?
Always.
With this show, we don't know what producers are thinking or what the company's thinking, or...
Always, and that's, again, probably why you can't take it personally. Like, I have to separate, like, Amy, the presenter, and again, it sounds weird to say it, but, like, I have to separate who I am when I'm on the radio or doing a show versus actually, like, me as a person, because if it is, you know, a show doesn't get renewed for a series or you're on a breakfast radio show that gets cancelled, it's hard not to take it personally because your job effectively is your personality. So you're like, well, what was I not doing something right, or did they just not like me anymore? When really it'll always come down to a business decision, and if it wasn't you, it would be someone else, and it can be cost cutting, it can just be wanting to change it because, let's be honest, things can get stale and they want to change it. So now I definitely understand it more, and I probably don't like to get too comfortable, because that's when, you know, if somebody comes along and says, right, the show's no more, I don't want to be completely caught off guard. So you're always having a little think about what you would do if the worst happened, without letting it completely overrun. Yeah.
What's the best bit of advice you've ever been given, and why?
Best bit of advice? Gosh, I've been given so much great advice over the years. I think I always come back to what probably my dad said early on, and it was, don't get too high with the highs and don't get low with the lows. Because no matter what comes up, I can feel myself being able to relate to that, because there are moments where it is you're nominated for awards, you've been part of like the biggest programs in television, but then there are also times where you're being trolled on social media, or your show's been cancelled, or you've made a terrible mistake, and I don't let either of those things define me, because I think some people can get carried away with the success and they get an ego and they think, well, I'm amazing now because I've done X, Y, and Z. So don't let that define you, but also not to think that if you make a mistake, it's a failure. Like, everyone makes mistakes and you can bounce back. So just trying to be level-headed is probably the best bit of advice that I've taken with me probably the last decade or so.
What's the biggest kind of on-air disaster you've had?
Oh gosh, now we're talking. I remember being at STV. Gosh, this is now taking me back. I remember being at STV, and it was, do you remember Live at 5?
Yes.
Yeah, STV2 and STV, when they set up STV Glasgow. And I was presenting that, and I remember it was early on and I hadn't done much presenting at this point, so it was like a big occasion, like trip to Zara, new outfit, like properly on it, whereas now I'm like, I'll throw on any old thing to go on the telly. But I remember like I had this kind of cream, like fake leather skirt and a shirt, and I was sitting on the sofa, and just before you go on air, you do the beginning of the show standing up. So we're sitting down and we're maybe going through the running order, like talking through the programme, and you hear the director, right, 30 to on air, stand up, skirt rips clean.
Oh my God.
And I'm talking, Gary, from like back down to like below my bum. It was awful, and it was just like split like that. And the worst thing was I must have been about 22, 23, and this poor camera guy in like his 40s had to run over just with gaffer tape and was like sticking my skirt to my butt cheeks. It was honestly like I was just standing there and everyone's looking at you and we still had to go on air. And he managed to put like 3 bits of tape, like boom, 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 over, just don't turn round. Don't turn round when you're on the telly. And getting through like an hour and a half of television, like, because they had the live set in the kitchen and they had the band. And I was just shuffling everywhere, just making sure not to turn round like a little penguin going side to side.
How did you concentrate?
Honestly, it was, I laugh about it now, but I remember at the time being absolutely mortified and it was all I could think about all show. So that was an on-air disaster. But there are, oh God, there'll have been too many. There's too many
I don't
things.
think I would have come back if that happened to me. I think I'd have been like, I'm done with this.
I'm over. I'm finished. Thanks. Honestly, man. It's so. I'll remember that being the first thing like that, and it was mortifying.
What about in the actual industry? See, before you had come into it, and even now, who do you look up to? Who are the people that you kind of... Because you probably see a lot of people whose standards are through the roof and you're learning your trade, but who kind of stuck out for you coming through?
Do you know, there's so many for, like, you could almost say to me a category and I'd be able to give you somebody in each one. Mm-hmm. I think I've always thought Gabby Logan is just amazing. And the fact she can turn her hand to so many things, obviously sport, you know, big shiny floor programs. She can do so much. So I've always thought Gabby Logan, she's really just, I think, relaxed and a very good interviewer. So I've always looked up to her. And then I think probably every Scottish person that wanted to get into the media, I always would just watch Jackie Bird. Yeah. And I remember like Jackie Bird, just this like Scottish icon, and then meeting her for the first time, I'm like, hi Jackie, I work here now as well. And it's just bizarre, these people that you've looked up to and that you've seen on telly to then meet them in real life. It's a bizarre experience, but I almost feel like that. I remember feeling like that every time I met somebody that I'd either listened to or worked with before, even in the same way, like when I met Des and Stephen, I used to drive to work listening to their breakfast show. Yeah. So then going into the studio and I'm like, oh my gosh, this is like listening to the radio and you're talking to the two of me. Like you just, there are so many brilliant broadcasters that all offer something totally different. Yeah. That it'd be hard to really kind of narrow it down to one, but I would definitely say somebody would be Gabby Logan, probably, that I've always looked up to and just thought she's a brilliant broadcaster.
Do you try and take bits from each person you work with? Like if you see things that they do or how they kind of carry themselves through a show, do you think I could implement that? Yeah,
I mean, it's funny, I don't look at them and probably think, oh, what are they doing? And I'll try and copy it. But it's certainly, I would say it's more, I've taken more from presenters that I've worked with before the on-air side of things. So it's like, you know, how are they preparing? What are they doing? Like just how they deal with people, how they carry themselves. I probably have taken more from that than their maybe actual presenting style, because everyone's so different in that. But I mean, I've worked with so many great presenters, and I must say behind every presenter, and this is often what people don't see, there are a team of producers, and you know, you've got editors and floor runners, and like there are so many people that need to be involved to put together what you then see on the telly or in the radio on the radio. And it's just, I always think sometimes that gets kind of forgotten, because it is a complete team effort. Like if any one of those things comes away, like the programme just would fall apart. So I probably try and take lots from people that I've worked with, producers, presenters, editors.
Do you have a preference for TV or radio?
Oh, that's hard. That is really hard. I love the buzz of live telly. Like there is nothing quite like it. I mean, I loved doing like the championship games and the sports scene highlights last year. So I absolutely love you get a proper adrenaline buzz, but I love probably the immediacy and the intimacy of radio. And I remember this at Capital, like you cut through to an audience in a way that you would never do on telly. And it was, people would come up to me and say, oh, I heard you talking about that on the radio, or, oh, Amy, you said this, or you told this story, or I just really related to that. And I love that, because to me, that's what it's all about. It's about if you can brighten up somebody's day when, you know, if they're having a rubbish day and they're just in the car, if you can tell them a wee funny story and they remember it, like that, that is really why we do the job we do. So I love the connection that you get through radio that you probably don't get on a kind of one-to-one basis on telly, but the adrenaline that I get on telly. Oh, Gary, I'm like a politician here. Can't give you an answer. Can't pick. They're like my children. They're like, try to pick a child you love more.
Got two favourites. I need to ask you, obviously, about when you start out and you're doing jobs and you get more high profile jobs and you become more known and you've got more opinions, and how do you balance the social media side of it? Because the world we live in now, everybody's got a view on everything, whether people want to hear it or not, they'll tell you anyway. But how do you find that side of things? Because you're on TV, you're on radio, you're on social media, and people like to talk about people that are in these positions.
They love it. They love it. And I love it. No, I don't. I think, see, in terms of the opinion, having an opinion side of things, it's probably something that, because, see, when I worked at the BBC and when I was staff there, you do need to be very careful with what you say. And I know some people go, oh, you know, that's awful. Presenters should be able to say what they want, blah, 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 like have an opinion on something. But I understand just why you can't really, because, you know, if you have all these presenters or reporters giving their opinion on everything, it's like you are representing the BBC when you are in an on-air role. So when I was at the BBC, I kind of stepped away from putting things on Twitter. Specifically, doesn't mean you don't have an opinion. God, I've got an opinion on loads of stuff, but you just have to. I was always more cautious. I wouldn't just pick up my phone and go, well, I think that's blah blah blah, because it can be like you have a responsibility. So I would certainly probably not be as vocal on social media as I probably would have been if I hadn't worked at the BBC. But I've been freelance not quite a year yet. But I mean, it's something that I think is important now. Like it's social media. When I got into the industry, it wasn't really a thing. Like Bebo had just closed down. But I can understand that for some people in their role, like for example, pundits or columnists, like having an opinion almost that is their. Like that's their brand. Like that's
but the throw the kind of clickbait out.
Like that's our USP, and I get that. Whereas mine, I've always erred away from getting into any kind of like online debate or trying to like bait people into getting a reaction out of them. I've always stayed away from that. In terms of dealing with social media, it's not easy at times. It isn't easy, and it's something that's probably got easier as I've got a little bit older, because now, I mean, I even had one a few weeks ago and it was like a clip that had gone viral, and you just know, because I came off air and I'm like, oh, why is my Twitter going mad? Why am I getting all these followers and tweets? And you soon realise you're like, oh right, there's a clip of me going round. And I just now ignore it. Like I just have to make a decision. I'm just not going to open social media for maybe the next 24 hours and it'll die down. And it always does. But I mean, it isn't nice. Like it's not nice when people target you. And I actually laugh thinking back now, because I remember my dad was in football and I remember being like a teenager, and again, they didn't have Twitter, but it would be like fan forums. And
they're worse than Twitter.
Oh my God. I remember going on fan forums, I must have been about 14, and people would be slagging my dad off. And I made the absolute terrible error of making an account to reply. that's my dad you're talking about. Like, you don't know anything. And I mean, to this day, there's probably people that will still talk about that or would be able to find it. But this desire to defend somebody you cared about, and it was like, I hate when people get personal because, like, you might think it is just words, but it can really hurt people. 100%. It can. So I think even way back then, it was my instinct to want to fight back. And I'm quite, I'm like, well, that's not true and that's not right. So I did have to try and not do that. And it was, I mean, the early days of, like, it was almost like sitting on my hands not to tweet back when somebody told you they thought you were terrible or hated you or hated your voice or you're rubbish or whatever. And I always would want to reply. And it was, I'd want to say, how would you feel if I came into your work and told you that I hate you? Like,
it's that whole, and they want you to bite, don't they? They want you to jump in and
that was I was naive and I was a lot younger, and that was probably what I wanted to do. But now I realise it's unfortunately it's part of the course. It is unfortunate. We have to just deal with it in this job, and I just don't take it personally anymore. You just can't.
And the thing is, it's with the amount of social media there is now, you know yourself, if you do something and you've said something or something's happened, right away it's going to go, somebody's going to clip it and put it on, and before you've even get home you're like, jeez.
I know.
It's just but I suppose that's something that people would probably need to consider as well, working in that industry, because if you are, I suppose the more well known you are, the more people want to shoot you down and take pleasure in trying to make somebody feel shit about themselves, and as you say, you don't know how that other person, you could be having the worst day ever, and you open your DMs and there's just horrendous stuff in there.
And it is, and it's, I think, it's hard enough if it's just one or two, but I mean, I can't even imagine what it must be like when you're talking pile-ons in their thousands. And really, it shouldn't matter whether it's one or two or 2,000 or a million. But it does. It seems to be the more voices there are, the louder it gets and the harder it can be to deal with. So I think it's definitely something to consider for people that are getting into the industry, because it can be, it's almost like there's the real world and then there's like what happens online, and you just have to, I mean, take both of them completely separately, because I don't think I've ever had people come up and shout abuse at me in the street or in a public place. Like, the only time people will come up and they'll always be like nice, or they'll just want to chat about something that they've seen or that you've done. Whereas it's the total opposite. Online, you don't get people going, oh, Amy, I loved that episode of this that you did. It's just telling you that you should never be on TV again. So you have to separate the two. Like, online is not representative of real life at all.
You could have the best performance ever. Someone will still say, oh yeah, well, that was terrible. Like, it doesn't matter what you do. People just go, let me just throw fire on that right now. And it's, you must get to a point you're like, I'm not even reading that. I just don't care. Whatever.
Yeah, you just have to let it just go over your head. Just ignore it, because if you start to get down in it, it really can. It can affect your confidence. It can, as you say, it can totally affect like your mental health. So you have to, and it is hard. You have to just try and ignore it the best that you can, and have a good support network around you as well, and just block out everything else.
Did you feel more prepared for it, in the sense of, obviously your dad was involved in football, and football fans can be the most horrific, be it online or at a stadium or whatever, but did it prep you in the sense of, obviously the more popular you become, you kind of know it's coming, it's kind of coming down the road, but you've already seen that with your dad, and he's lived in that position, so I suppose it was a wee bit more preemptive for you, that you saw how that affects people.
Because it does. And I mean, I remember being, it was when, remember the Gretna days, my dad was at Gretna, and I'd go and watch him again when I was probably about 14, 15, and I would always go with my gran and granddad, my wee brother, and we'd be watching games, and so often it's the home fans, it's your own support, isn't it? And you'd be sitting next to people who would just be screaming abuse at my dad when he was playing, or then when he was managing, and you would just, you were desperate to say something, and quite often my granny, who's now 93 by the way, she'd be there with her stick and she would turn round and she would say, "Excuse me, that's my son you're talking about." And she would just shut somebody down straight away, and they would go, "Oh, right." And it maybe was that moment of people get so passionate about football, and I can understand, like, it is so important to people, but like, because growing up it was just my dad's job, and like I would, you know, you'd see him coming home after a defeat or whatever, and he's like, "Oh, you know, he's been called every name under the sun," and it's like, you would get quite annoyed about it, 'cause you're like, this is just a game,
and it's your dad,
and it's you're like, it's just you don't want to see people that you care about being subject to abuse, whether it's, I know it can be in jest sometimes or whatever, but I think it prepares you for a bit of it. But it's certainly, on the other hand, it gives you an appreciation of just how hurtful it can actually be as well.
And did you see yourself ever get involved in football? Because obviously you've grown up in a football household, you've had sports scene, you've got your podcast as well, you're sacked in the morning. Did you see that coming at any point, or was that a surprise that you kind of ended up doing some football related stuff as well?
Do you know, not really. I think, I mean, I've got, as I say, a family full of boys, and grown up in football and played football, and just like always enjoyed watching football and stuff and going to games. And I remember I did fall into it in a way by accident, because I obviously did journalism and my background was certainly news. But I remember Rahman had to go, I think it was an emergency dentist appointment. Right. I remember that. And the boss at the time turned around and was like, "Right, you're going to have to present. Go and get ready. You're doing the sport tonight on STV." I was like, "What?" And I did it. And that was almost my first step into it. And then whenever there were reporters off, they were like, "Oh, do you want to be on sport this week?" And I did. I loved it. I loved going to the pressers. It was the same when I was at West Sound. I'd love like going. It was like Ayr United and Killie and Queen of the South, and I'd love going to the pressers because it was quite a natural environment, like going back to football clubs and chatting away to managers. So I kind of got that little break into it and made that step into it. But as I say, it was never a plan, because I don't plan anything. And I used to think, gosh, because people would say, "Oh, you're a bit of like a jack of all trades. Like, you've done like serious news, but you also do like entertainment, and you've done these TV programs, and you've got podcasts, and you do radio, and you also do sports scene. Like, what do you do?" And at some point I probably need to decide. But I quite like the variety. I like the variety, and I've just said yes to the opportunities as they've come up. But I've always loved football specifically as a sport, but I never planned to actually get into it. I enjoyed playing. I was never good enough to actually make it as a footballer. And back then I actually had to play with boys because there were not girls teams. But like I didn't plan to get into football. I've just been quite lucky in the sense that I've had the opportunities that have come up.
How has your dad been with you moving into like football and things? Because he's been on your podcast as well, hasn't he? So he's so funny, because he'll say, he's like, "Amy, you used to go places," and it was true, because I would like turn up to pressers, or I'd be talking to people and they'd be like, "Oh, you're Davey's daughter, like I know you know your dad." And he's like, "Now I turn up and people say, 'You're Amy's dad.'" It's like, because they listen to your podcast, so they've seen you do this and do that. He's like, "This is weird." It's like, this is bizarre. But no, he's always been very supportive. And I think when I first was going to those press conferences, I remember for STV, it was so daunting. You know, you'd be turning up, and quite often you were like the only female in the room, and I didn't know anyone, and I was there filming it all and asking the questions at the same time, and it was so scary. And there's always one that sticks in my mind, because I remember quite early on, because despite doing this for a job, I'm quite a shy person out with certain situations. With a microphone here, I'm fine, but in like
I don't know, even meetings or boardroom situations or just other environments, I'm often the quietest person in the room.
Yeah.
And I remember being in this press conference at Rangers. It was Ali McCoist at the time, and could not get a word in. I was like, Sky and BBC and PA, and I'm like, oh. And by the time they'd all asked 15 questions each, I was like, I don't know what to ask now, apart from what you're going to have for your lunch, Ali. I don't know. And I just was I was rattled by like that whole experience. I was like, oh my God, I can't do this. And I remember at the end, just like walking out, and the only way I could find, I just found the ability to say, Ali, like my dad says hi, like he knows you. And he was like, who's your dad? I was like, Davy Irons. He was like, arm like round me, like walking down the corridor. Who's your dad? Oh, you phone him after this. You tell him I'm asking for him a last stop, blah, blah, blah. And all the journalists were like, who is this? But see, after that, quite often, you know, I would go back the next week and he would make sure that I would get a question. He'd be like,
love that.
And he would like look to me to get in. And the thing is, I can understand, you know, now that I've been in it that long, you have to just jump in. You just have to like jump in. But see, as like a young female in that environment, when you don't have the confidence, it is really hard. Like it is really, really difficult to jump over people. And yeah, I just always remember thinking, thank goodness for Ali McCoist.
I love Ali McCoist, honestly. See if I ever get Ali McCoist on this podcast, it will end the next day. That's it.
You're like, yes, you will keep him here all
honestly,
night.
Oh my days. I've got to ask you, obviously, Mr. Barton has had a lot to say the last couple of weeks about females working in sport, broadcasters. How do you view stuff like that? Because you're working in the industry and you've worked hard in the industry to get to the position you're in. But how do you take comments like that from people that have been professional footballers and should probably know better than to say stuff like that? But from your point of view, how do you view it from the industry side of things?
It's infuriating.
Yeah.
I mean, first of all, I'm probably quite cynical, and I'm like, do you know what? He's got a podcast that he's trying to push.
Yeah.
And that the annoying thing is that there are certain social media platforms that almost like amplify these voices. It's like, well, he's going to get an audience, and he's putting things out quite often for shock value, I think. But I think it's damaging, it's so unhelpful, and it's just untrue.
Yeah.
I mean, I can't remember the exact details, but I'm sure the first point that he was trying to make about a female commentator, he just got it completely wrong. And he picked up on her words that were actually about something, an incident 15 seconds before the goal or something.
Yeah.
Like, I can't remember the details, but it turned out to be just factually incorrect. But I think it's difficult because I feel females quite often, we get more heat anyway. And it's, you know, if I went on air and said something, a guy could go on and say the exact same thing, and it's like, you know, it's like, what, she doesn't know what she's talking about. That was wrong. And it's almost, I mean, thinking about male pundits that say stupid things.
Some of them are horrendous.
It's just accepted. Whereas women in this what is still a male-dominated environment, it's almost like she doesn't know what she's talking about. And it's really, really difficult, and it's infuriating. And I think that's why I'm so glad that over the last probably 10 years, there has been a drive. There has been a drive to increase the number of women in sport broadcasting, because it was so imbalanced. I mean, I even remember when I got the job at the BBC on the 9, I mean, people didn't say this to my face, but there were murmurings, you know what it's like around, because it's such a small industry. And there was an attitude of, well, it was two women that got the sports presenting jobs because they're women.
Oh, like a tick box, right?
And it's so, I probably use that as a driving factor rather than what people think on Twitter. If you think it comes from like within the industry that people have that attitude, you almost do want to prove them wrong. But I don't think we're there at all yet. But I think certainly the fact that you do see more women on high profile programmes, commentating, presenting, like Premiership, Premier League matches, it's going to help. And it's going to help the next generation of girls coming through as well.
Yeah.
Because they need to, like, I'm a massive believer that you need to, like, see it to
you've got to
see that
visualise
it's
it.
possible for you.
Yeah.
And there were not that many, certainly when I was growing up. And I mean, when it came to actually playing football or talking about football, it was like, no, it was not a space for girls at all.
Mm-hmm. But it is changing for the better, which is the main thing.
Mm-hmm. Totally. And that's, I think we've made massive strides in the last few years. You even just need to look at the coverage of the women's game and the progression in that regard. It's brilliant to see. I mean, a few years ago, top flight women's games wouldn't have been on telly.
Yeah.
And we have that in Scotland and obviously down south.
Yeah.
So that's got to be a good thing and is going to hopefully make a difference in years to come.
Yeah. What would you change about your industry? If you could, if you magic wand, anything, what would you change and why?
What would I change? God, that's a really tough one. I don't want to just blanketly say, get rid of Twitter or X, whatever it's called. What would I change about it? I still think there's still an issue with like actual fair pay.
Right.
I think there are so many people, and that's what I mean about behind the scenes. There'll be so many people that do these brilliant jobs to make productions possible, and they're not paid what they should be paid. I think it's still an industry that relies and maybe takes advantage of people's goodwill in a sense of, like, you're so desperate to get into the industry, you'll do it for free.
Yeah.
And I would love to see that change, but it is difficult because there are people that want to get that break. So they would do, I'll host that for nothing, or I'll do this, I'll do that. But I would just like there to be more, kind of financial recognition for people in the industry, because there are so many people that I just know that are going from job to job, and it's not, people think working in telly, working in radio is a secure, well-paid job, but it's not. So I would like to change that.
Yeah. That's a good one.
Fair pay.
That's a good one. I wanted to ask you about your podcast as well. Who would be your ideal guest? Who would you love to have on?
My goodness.
And who's been your favourite guest so far?
Oh, my favourite guest.
We'll take your dad out because that's a bias.
Dad's out. My favourite guest. Probably, oh my God, it's so hard. Dick Campbell's up there.
Yeah.
Like, he is so funny, and just I think we had him on 2 or 3 times. We did a special at the Edinburgh Festival. We did stuff around the World Cup as well, and we had him on as one of our early guests, and he's just such good value.
Yeah.
His way of telling stories is absolutely first class. So I'd say he's up there with probably my favourite guest. Who would I love to have on? I think obviously Sir Alex. Sir Alex would be the absolute dream. And the thing is, I keep saying to Craig, I'm like, you could pick up the phone. Like, I couldn't. I would pick up the phone and I'd be told to F off, and it'd be like hanging up. I'm like, you could try and get Sir Alex on the podcast.
You don't ask.
But I don't think. Well, yeah, I know he just doesn't do podcasts. Maybe one day we'll be able to persuade him to come on. But I mean, because it's all about management, who better can you get to talk about it than
That's the pinnacle.
The best manager of all time, arguably. So I'd love to get Sir Alex on, but. Yeah, I can't see that being achievable.
Never know. You get Alex Ferguson and Dick Campbell on.
Can you imagine the two of them on together?
They'd probably just talk amongst themselves.
They would.
Like,
you wouldn't need Craig and I.
No,
we'd be able to just walk out the room.
I just feel Dick's like 100 miles an hour. Like, my podcast sponsor, George, his company sponsors a broth.
All right.
So anytime I see him, I'm like, I'm terrified of this guy. Like, I genuinely don't know what I'd say to him.
Like,
just seems to be like, just worrying constantly.
He's a brilliant guy, and he just, I mean, you just laugh constantly whenever he's on the podcast. So no, he would definitely be my favourite. We've had so many though. Like when I think about it, we've had Sven-Goran Eriksson.
Jeez.
We've had Harry Redknapp. Lou Macari was hilarious.
Yeah.
Gordon Strachan was terrifying.
Yes, do you know what? See, when you watch Gordon Strachan doing like clips of like post-match interviews, I always feel so sorry for the person interviewing him because he always just says something passive-aggressive or sarcastic. Another person's like, I'm just doing my job here.
Yeah, I'm just trying to get through it. He was, I've done a few things with Gordon actually, but the first time we did the live shows at it was during the World Cup at the Drygate, and we had Gordon on. Who was he on with? Ryan McGowan,
right?
Who'd played for Australia, so that's why he was in. And Ryan was just so like smiley and energetic, and it was the absolute contrast of Ryan there telling us all the stories, what it was like with Ange Postecoglou as his manager when he was with Australia, and then you had Gordon sitting there beside him, just like, "What's this? Right? What you wanting to talk to me about, Amy?" And I mean, he did warm up, but that's his thing, isn't it? But I remember being like, "Oh my goodness, I'm quite scared of Gordon Strachan," and by the end, it was like hugs all round and he was grand. But yeah, it's quite intimidating when you don't know what you're going to get from someone in that way. In
that kind of space as well, because like you obviously you hear about a lot of managers' reputations, and then obviously if you're speaking to them, you're like, if I say the wrong thing here, this is just going to trigger off. But then I was going to ask you about working with Craig, because a lot of people perceive Craig to be like that and like standoffish, and I think sometimes he kind of plays with the press a little bit when he's
even I did. Honestly, before we started the podcast, when it was in its kind of early stage of kind of piloting and development. I thought, gosh, Craig is, because when he was at Hearts, I'd interviewed him before, and I don't think he would actually even remember that, but I remember thinking, God, he was quite scary.
Yeah.
But see, away from that environment, away from that kind of press pack, like pit, that can be quite intimidating. Yeah. He was brilliant. We got him in the room and we did the pilot, and it was a good laugh. And I think we've been going for about 2 years, and honestly, I love the guy to bits. We have such a laugh, and he's really come out of his shell as well, I think. But I can understand, because when you're in management, you're being asked question after question, and you do have to put a bit of a guard up, and it's like you're fighting off these tough questions, and you know what the headlines are going to be, and you're then probably under pressure if your job might be on the line and results aren't going your way. So I can kind of get the defensive stance that he maybe had with the media for a while, but once you take him away from that, he's not like that at all.
Love that.
He's a much softer soul than people would realise.
Be fuming seeing this. I wanted to ask, I'm always curious with the answer with this, if you were to go back and speak to 16-year-old Amy,
oh my gosh,
what would you, based on everything you've done up to now, what would you go back and tell her?
What would I say? Enjoy it. Don't put pressure on yourself, and actually just try and enjoy it.
Yeah.
Like stop being this stress head control freak that is trying to like guess what might go wrong. Stop thinking about all the things that might go wrong, and just enjoy it, because ultimately things will go wrong, and there's not much you can do about it either. And I'm a big believer that the bad things that can happen, whether it's in your life or your career, like they make you as much as the good stuff does, and it all builds a more resilient person at the end of the day. So I think I would go back and say, please just relax a little bit, relax and enjoy it, because it's fun. You're talking nonsense and getting paid. Like, how many people can say that they do that for a job?
Exactly.
So it's I would definitely just go back and a wee arm around the shoulder. Come on, wee Amy.
It's going to be all right.
It's not going to be as bad as you think it's going to be. You'll be all right.
And I'll finish with asking you, what advice would you give to anyone looking to either they're starting out in the industry or they're sitting at uni or school thinking this is what I want to do in my life? What would you tell them based on your experiences?
Don't be afraid to try. Like, I think there'll be so many people that think I would love to do that, and it's like it can be a bit daunting.
Yeah,
you're 1 minute you're maybe sitting at school or you're at college or uni or whatever, and you're looking at where you'd like to be. You're like, I would love to, I don't know, say it's be a news reporter or, you know, do interviews on sports, you know, whatever it was. It's hard to see how you get there.
Yeah.
But you have to take that first step. And the first step can be something as simple, send that email.
Yeah.
Go and chat that person's door. Nowadays, drop that person a DM. Like, ask if you can come in and have a look around, or shadow, or do work experience, or advice, or contacts, whatever it is, because pretty much every single person that I've ever asked for advice or for support are more than happy to help.
Yeah.
But you need to also be prepared that it's not going to happen overnight. Like, you need to put the graft and the miles in, because you're not going to send one email and then be presenting match of the day. You're going to have to take those little steps. And I do think, see, once you get your foot in the door, once you crack it that wee bit, that's you.
Yeah.
Because it's, by that point, you've shown that you can do something, you've made the contacts, and it just snowballs from there.
Yeah.
And that's certainly what I found. It was from West Sound, it was NSTV, and it was Capital, and it was BBC, and it was Heart, like, and everything in between. But getting that first chance was the hardest thing.
Yeah.
And you can't give up. You just need to keep, whether it's job rejections or not getting replies to emails, don't just do it once.
Yeah.
Go, oh, right, it's not for me.
Yeah.
It's not going to happen. No, it will. Just keep going.
Yeah,
keep
trying.
going, because if one person says no, try someone else. So I would say, just don't give up if you really want to do something, because there are a million ways of getting there as well.
Amazing. Thank you so much. It's been
Thank
brilliant.
you,
Do you know what? It's been
Gary.
brilliant. I love looking back at all the things people have done, because I think you always get interesting. It probably prompts memories for the person as well of different parts they've had, and it's always good for people listening to hear it's not an easy road. It's not I've just sent one email and I got these jobs. It doesn't work like that. There is ups and downs, but I think from hearing from people who have done it, you can then visualise, things will go wrong at some point, but that's part of the process.
It's all a laugh, isn't it?
Yeah, love it.
It's always good looking back and being like, oh, my
Done all
telly,
right.
my skirt ripped on the telly, and I've, but what I always think is, as well, like, nobody's died.
Yeah.
Like, I'm always so, like, you're very quickly brought back down to earth when you realise people actually do real jobs. You know, we've got, like, brain surgeons, and we've got police officers and paramedics and firefighters and care workers, and like, people are doing real jobs. And even when I'm having a bad day, it's never as bad as it possibly could be, and what someone else will be going through. So that's also another thing. You have to have a sense of perspective.
Definitely.
Like,
what job would you do if you weren't doing this?
Oh, what job would I do? It's changed over the years.
Right.
I used to think, I thought I wanted to be a lawyer, and then probably realised I wasn't going to be smart enough to do that. But no, I wanted to be a lawyer because I just would always get involved in family arguments and think I was like
the
mediator in the middle. Then I thought I would join the police.
Right.
Then what else? I thought I'd like to be a counsellor.
Right.
That's probably been one of the recent ones. Not like standing for election, by the way, like counselling, therapy, psychiatrist. So it kind of changes. But that's what I mean. One day I might be doing that, Gary.
Yeah.
I Might be looking for a real job. Who knows?
Might be Amy Irons Law.
Who knows?
Just don't know. Brilliant.
Defending myself when I say something I shouldn't be on the television.
Thank you so much. And
Thanks, Gary. It's been so good. Thank you.